Okay, everybody, here's the third in my series of kind of tutorials about the court cards. And I'm just going to start by saying something very obvious, depending on how much you've seen this channel. This channel is about Rider-Waite-Smith style tarot reading. It's not about anything else. I've only done that, and I've done that for 40 years, and I've read books about it. I've read a couple of books about Marseille-style tarot reading, but I haven't really done it. I think I tried it once and it didn't really work. So if you want to hear about other styles of tarot reading, this is not the channel for you. I'm very interested in the Rider-Waite-Smith purely because I think it's a very good system. I think the combination of Waite and Smith was a great combination. I think Pamela Colman-Smith was very inspired. And I think the innovations she did in the pip cards are just extraordinarily inspired and very helpful for divination. So there I've confessed. And I just briefly want to say, because this is important if you're learning tarot or if you want to know more about tarot, that there are lots of new decks coming out all the time. And just because it's a new tarot deck, I mean, it could be fine on its own terms, but that doesn't mean it's going to work as a Rider-Waite-Smith style deck. So what I propose on this channel is that you learn everything that the Rider-Waite-Smith deck has to tell you. You go with everything that Pamela Colman-Smith has given you, and that'll set you up very well for a tarot reading practice. And on top of that, you don't have to struggle with decks that don't give you that for one reason or another. You know, there are lots of lovely designers in the world, but they don't always necessarily mesh in with Pamela Colman-Smith's ideas. They don't even necessarily understand them. You get decks that partially understand them, decks that there are designers who understand how close they need to be for it to work, and designers who don't. And with the court cards, you don't have to be super close to what Pamela did to make the court cards work. Let me give you an example. We have here the Sheridan Douglas tarot. And it's designed by a guy called Alfred Douglas, who wrote a very interesting book about the tarot in the 70s. He came from a tradition of magical people in London. He was taught by someone who was taught by someone who was in the Golden Dawn, that sort of thing. So he brought out this book, and then his son-in-law illustrated the book, and the illustrations became a deck. And here are some of them. Now, Alfred Douglas went his own way. He knew a lot about tarot meanings, and he didn't stick entirely to RWS. So when you look at his court cards, you know, they're very simple. They're simple in the sense that Marseille decks are simple, I suppose. You know, you've got a king with a sword. The sword's very obvious. And it's easy and it's graphic, and it's what the Germans call plakativ. It pops, doesn't it? Except when it doesn't pop, like here, when the colours are not contrasted enough. But there you are, a queen on a throne with a sword. Then you have a knight on a horse with a sword, and then you have a knave with a sword and a dagger. And I have found that, you know, I mean, some snobby people find this deck ugly, but I found people who know nothing about tarot respond quite intuitively to this deck, because it kind of like it has energy, it wears its heart on its sleeve. And it does have echoes of Pamela Colman-Smith. But what I want to say is that this kind of deck is kind of a little bit on the neutral side. You get a guy with a crown, an old guy with a beard and a crown and a sword, king of swords. It's not rocket science, you know. A person on a horse with a sword, it's the knight of swords. Things can get a bit crap when people try to reinvent the wheel. Now, this is a deck I picked up kind of by mistake the other day on eBay. It's the Joe Sparrow Tarot. Lovely name, the Sparrow Tarot. And it's highly contemporary. It's from about 8 years ago. And it's in some sort of, I don't know, digital style. Online, it looks better than in the flesh. In the flesh, these lines are very blurry, and they have a kind of fuzzy, ragged quality, which makes the cards feel not very present at all. But I just want to tell you what I want to say about this deck as an example of a reworking of the tarot. Here we have someone being quite aggressively modern, and in the course of being aggressively modern, just flying in ideas about the tarot, which are the designer's ideas, and which in this case I completely don't endorse. You know, he's a king and he's got a sword, and you know, I don't know, he's wagging his finger and he's got his mouth wide open. So in other words, he's mouthing off and he's telling people what to do. So this is, I think, ironically enough, a very judgmental rendering of the King of Swords. The King of Swords is traditionally a judge, and we're going to get to that. But he's not necessarily judgmental. Actually, you need judges in society. That the idea of law is to prevent warfare and to prevent people killing people in the streets. So what I'm getting for this, and I might be being unfair, is that some people are judgmental and wag their fingers and mouth off. And I think it's very unfortunate to have that depicted in a tarot card, at least in this tarot card. It seems rather negative. And I'll show you two more. We've got in this deck, we've got the Queen of Battens, who we saw in my first video. I mean, this is almost unrecognizable as the Queen of Battens, but the designer has seen that there's a black cat in the design and has leapt into the idea that the Queen of Battens is a witch. And this is a nighttime scene, which is extraordinary because the Queen of Battens is very much a solar card. We have a kind of sunflower there, but it's more of a Halloween Queen of Battens. So I think that's problematic. And I'll give you one more. A horrendous King of Pentacles. And I guess the designer is going with the idea that pentacles symbolize money. I'm not going to be doing the pentacle suit this week, but when I get to it, I will explain to you why pentacles most certainly don't symbolize money. They are much more interesting than that. And here we have, you know, and this is the right way up, ladies and gentlemen. This is a king. He seems to be hanging upside down over piles of money. So he's, if you like, he's the vampire of money, isn't he? Because the designer thinks, okay, a king, someone with, I don't know, power, status, and he's connected to the suit of coins, so he must be, you know, a bad capitalist person, and he's green. So this is absolutely a demonic King of Pentacles, which is a pity because in some ways the King of Pentacles is one of the most benevolent cards in the pack. And if you like, is an archetype, or if you like, a spirit who could be extremely helpful to the querent, if that person was available to that help. So much for modern decks that I want to, you know, throw shade on. Some people say, "Oh, Robert, it's so marvelous the way you throw shade." I don't actually get up in the morning thinking to myself, I'm going to throw shade today and that'll be fun. It's just that I kind of decided that I'm not going to go through life and, you know, avoid throwing shade because I want to be liked. So we're going to flip the camera and look at the cards, and we're going to talk about the Swords Court. So let's look at the king, and let's start off with a truly loving and reverent image of the King of Swords. This is drawn by Radomil Boguslavsky in his epoch-making Oculi Occultati tarot, which I think is the tarot of the century. Not that the century's finished yet. And then let's go straight into Pamela's king. Now the court cards, ladies and gentlemen, have resonances with the major arcana, and that's as it should be. In fact, the major arcana and the minor arcana do have resonances with each other. And so it's not rocket science to notice that the King of Swords is a kind of cousin of the Emperor. But I think it is interesting to notice that there's a difference. I would say the King of Swords is lighter than the Emperor. You hardly see his throne at all. And whether this is a throne or not behind him, I mean, it looks like almost like a curtain. And the rest of the throne is obscured by his cloak. Whereas here with the Emperor, that throne is very solid. It's stony. It's very much in evidence. It slightly overwhelms the guy. It envelops him. It is him. He's very much, in a sense, identified with it. It's a heavier man. It's an older man. He's bearded. There is a lot of very interesting difference between these two cards. And because the sword is the one of the four suits that is a weapon, and because the king is the highest rank of the four court cards, I think people assume that the King of Swords must be some sort of baddie. I don't see it that way. And I'm fairly sure Pamela Coleman-Smith didn't either. I think she was aware of the court cards as elemental forces. In fact, I find her court cards quite fairyish, actually. Like they are not actual kings and queens. They're more like the fairies at the bottom of the garden who are acting out these king and queen roles. And I think in particular that could be said to be true of the swords, because the swords are associated in this system with air, okay? All four of these cards have blue sky and clouds in them. All four of them have birds flying around in the air. She just gets one bird. He gets two. He gets three birds, and this guy gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He gets 10 birds. 10 birds in the shape of a fish. So I often point this out. As Yolanda Robinson points out, let me show you something amazing. If we're going down the suits, batons to cups to swords to pentacles, we could say we're going down the pages. So we progress from page of cups to page of swords. So here we have a fish coming out of the cup. And here we have 10 birds in the air in the shape of a fish. Yolanda Robinson makes the brilliant comment that cups maybe connect you with the world of the unconscious, where things are, in a sense, not rationally quantified or systematized or even named. And then from cups we move to air, which is the world of thought and the world of definitions. And so the material from the subconscious here becomes birds in the sky. So the thing of water becomes a thing of air. So the material from the unconscious or the subconscious, this undefined, obscure, difficult to pin down, dreamlike material which comes up from those realms, moves into the realm of swords of thought, and the fish becomes birds. And I find that absolutely brilliant. I haven't seen a single modern tarot in which the designer has noticed that. But what I wanted to say is that the swords court is a thing of air. It is not a heavy thing. Can you see how much difference? Can you see the obvious difference between these two cards? This guy is not a heavy king. There is air, there's clouds, there are birds, and on the back of the throne or the canopy or whatever it is, there are butterflies. There are also butterflies here with the Queen of Swords, and the Queen of Swords is the most severe of all the 16 court cards, but still she has butterflies on her throne. That's very light. We have the Knight of Swords, the tarot's maniac, or one of the two maniacs. And he has butterflies here as well. no butterflies for the page, but he doesn't need them because he has good legs. So to get down to the nitty-gritty, what I want to say about the King of Swords is I think Pamela's court cards are elemental and astrological. So my way of understanding the King of Swords, which I suggest to you, is understand him as a representative of air sign energies. For example, Aquarius, modern, forward-looking, believing in fairness, believing in brotherhood, idealistic. And sure, he's wielding a sword, but as I said in my introduction, the point of law is to prevent bloodshed. And it doesn't always happen. You know, people get punished in law, or at least they used to. But the idea of wielding the sword of law is to create peace. That is the original idea of it. And that's how I understand the King of Swords. I see the King of Swords as primarily an Aquarian, but I would say that all these four in the Swords family, they have qualities of Aquarius and Gemini and Libra. So they have the balance, they have the fairness, they have the understanding of words, and they have the broad horizons and the forward-looking qualities of Aquarius. So what I'm trying to say is, let's not be superficial thinking about the King of Swords, okay? Now, with the Queen of Swords, she doesn't seem to be subjected to the same kind of bad rap as the King. I mean, she's got enough of a bad rap anyway. Look, here she is. Here's Radomil's queen. Fantastic. There, I've put a shell over her chest. But, you know, she's holding a severed head in this picture. Fantastic. In other words, she is not to be messed with. And we all know this is the Queen of Swords. In the playing card pack, she's the Queen of Spades. She's the bad luck lady of the pack. But going a bit deeper, what do we see? Well, on her wrist is a bracelet, which seems to symbolize bereavement. So she's a widow, or maybe she has lost someone else who was close to her. She looks grumpy. She's not a particularly happy person. She's not, I mean, unlike the Queen of Cups, she's not in the business of creating happiness. I see her as being in the business of survival. I've noticed that the throne is relatively heavy and it's relatively present in this picture. And I feel that she's sort of slightly slumped into it. It looks like she's kind of a bit fused with the throne there. And if you look at the way Pamela has drawn the clouds and the sky, her head is actually above the clouds. So my feeling is that the Queen of Swords, there's a little bit of a distance between her head and the ground. I don't want to be judgmental, but there is a kind of suggestion there of an intellect which might be a little bit of its own thing, if you know what I mean. She's tending towards being all intellect. She's traditionally connected with Pallas Athene, the goddess, who represents the triumph of mind over brute force, okay? So I see her as a survivor. And if you want my keywords, I see this guy as a judge. I see her as a survivor. You can say other things about her. You can say that she's a dangerous enemy. You can say that she's someone who has suffered. And all these nuances can back you up when you're doing your readings, but let's keep our keywords simple, okay? She has suffered and she's survived and she's fought her way into a kind of stability in society or in her life. Let's have a look at the Knight. The Knight of Swords is a card that, again, people who know nothing about tarot find it very easy to relate to, very easy to understand. He does clearly have a certain maniac quality. I mean, the Knight of Battens also is a maniac, I think. So for me, those are the two maniacs. It's quite interesting to hear what the Victorians thought of the Knight of Swords, what the Golden Dawn thought of the Knight of Swords. Those guys quite admired him as the representation of pure intellect in action. Now, I think in our post-psychoanalysis world, we might be a little suspicious of someone who claims to be pure intellect, because one might ask, okay, what about the rest of you? What about your other chakras? Is that wise to be pure intellect? I have or had a friend, I don't know if we're still friends, who very much reminded me of the Knight of Swords. This is someone who got into a few debates when he was a young man and was kind of thrown out of his circle for ideological reasons, and then became very much in the business of debate, in the business of fighting, intellectually speaking. And this is someone who's very intelligent, but lives to debate and lives to fight. Okay, so the Knight of Swords, you could say, signals the approach of battles, and I find this a very, very good keyword. So again, I'm reading him slightly like a Major Arcana card rather than just a personality type. When this card appears on the table, you get that feeling, oh, there's a battle on the horizon. I think Pamela was not entirely of the opinion that being pure intellect is a good idea. I think this horse is vaguely comic. It's too much. He seems to be sort of looking for drama, looking for, a hurricane and an earthquake and war and destruction. On a personality level, I would say, though, that Knight of Sword types can be extremely loyal friends because they see themselves as good people and virtuous people, and they are fighting for right. They're fighting for the good. Now, that might lead them into causing bad things to happen, but, that's one of the contradictions of being a human being, isn't it? So, fighter, bringer of battles, insanely ideas-based. And I like to think, with the butterflies on his insignia, well, he's fighting for ideas, isn't he? And these ideas, maybe they live for a day and then get to the next day and they're obsolete. While we're here, why did Radamil give us the Knight of Swords riding a dolphin? I can't wait to ask Radamil that. Finally, we have the lovely Page of Swords in that rather fetching tunic. Now, here we can look at traditional meanings, and they're very, very useful. This guy was traditionally thought to be a spy, and this is a traditional meaning that was applied to the playing card deck, in the late Middle Ages. And, in terms of reading the court cards as quasi-major arcana cards, I find that very useful. When that goes on the table, I think to myself, oh, okay, a spy, spying, observing, looking. Now, a spy is not necessarily a friend. He may be less of a friend than he seems. So there is a slight feeling of danger, I think, or warning when this card comes onto the table. And for me, what it can mean is this. Look, there's a Page of Swords on the table. It could be that you are being observed. It could be that you are being observed and your behavior is being noted. Okay. So it's almost like if you're considering getting away with something, if you think you can get away with something and not be seen, well, maybe you can. But if the Page of Swords is in the picture, maybe you can't. So for me, I suppose the key word could be an observer, or it could be observing, or it could be you are being watched. And that can be very interesting advice. You know, I think we are all visible to a greater or lesser extent in today's world. I mean, we get more and more visible the more the government spies on us. And we make ourselves visible and we overshare, don't we? So I think sometimes we lose track of how visible we are. Of course, I'm thinking about myself, ladies and gentlemen. I always am. But let's wind this video up with another gorgeous vision of a Radomil Bogoslovsky page. I think Radomil has given us generous lashings of visual pleasure with his pages. Let's just see how he appears there. Let's just see how he appears there. Tarot cards are pretty things, aren't they? I think that's why I like this job. You have been watching Tea and Tara. I am Robert Farah, and you will be back. You have been watching Tea and Tara. I am Robert Farah, and I will be back next week with more of this stuff, and hopefully you will be back to watch. Bye for now.